Hello, my name is Joyce Harper and I'm Professor of Reproductive Science at the Institute for Women's Health at University College London. And I've been asked to give a talk on contraception to year 13s. So this is a recording of this talk. I've actually done this talk 4 times in the last few days to get some feedback from teachers and from the year 13s. So I hope you learn something from this talk. It's going to be quite interactive. So I've asked your teachers to put some of the questions that I would ask if I was there on Kahoot, and I'll show them when they've got to load those questions when we get there. So I've been working in fertility and reproduction for over 30 years, and I've recently written a book called Your Fertile Years, which has a chapter on contraception and also one on STIs. So we're going to start with 2 questions. So I'll hand over to your teachers now, and they are going to ask you 2 questions. Do you think you might want children in the future? And if you want kids, what is the ideal age you would like to have them? So the teachers can now just press pause on this video, and then you can answer those questions. So I can say, it'd be interesting to see what you've put, but I'll say that even when I've asked other years this question about do you think you might want children in the future, the vast majority of children have said that they do want kids. And the normal response when I've asked if you want kids, what is the ideal age you would like to have them, most of you have said around age 26 to 30 or 31 to 35. No one, when I've done this, have said under 20. They don't want to have kids under 20. So I want to show you this graph now. This is the global average age women give birth around the world. And it's got lots of countries that you can see at the bottom. And if we look at the black diamonds, this is the age for 1970. The white diamonds is 1995. And the blue columns are 2017. And we can see on the left here, this is the women's age. So as most of you have said, you wanted to have kids around about the age of 30, just before or just after. That is actually the age most women globally do have their first child. But if we look here, it goes up to 32, quite a few countries around about the age 32. And what we can see that in almost every country, this age has increased between 1970 and 2017. So the way people are having children is that nowadays they are having children older than they did back in the 70s. And if we looked at a graph of men, we would find quite similar findings. So I want to ask you 2 more questions now. What do you think it would be like to be a parent when you are a teenager? And what would you like to achieve before you have children? So I'm not sure if on the Kahoot your teachers are using, you can pick more than one. You might not even be able to pick all of these. They might slightly edit the question, but we just want to see what they can do. You can put me on pause again now. So hopefully you've now answered those 2 questions. So when I was in the classroom and asked what people think it would be like to be a parent when you're a teenager, the most common response actually was expensive. And obviously they felt that their way of life would change. And they'd have to be more responsible. But yeah, expensive came out the top. And when I asked what would they'd like to achieve before they had children, the most common by a long way was to be financially stable. So I've done these surveys in other countries and with older people, and the data that we've got has been very similar to what I got when I did it with year 13s, that most people want a kid around age 30, they do want children, and they want to be financially stable before they have children. So let's look at the fertile years, because this talks about contraception, but to understand contraception, we've got to think about our fertility. So I'm just going to spend a bit of time talking to you about the menstrual cycle, and then I'm going to go through all the contraception methods and say just a little bit about them. You have had a lot about how contraception works in previous lessons through your years at school, but I'm just going to concentrate on a small part of that. I'm not really going to talk about sexually transmitted infections at all today. There's just not time in this lesson. But they are obviously very important. If you are having sex with more than one partner, it's a really good idea to get regularly checked. The only way to prevent an STI is by using a condom. So if you're not using a condom and having more than one partner, please get checked regularly. If you do contract an STI, they are very easy to treat, especially early on. Normally, depending what it is, normally it's just antibiotics. But what's really important is some of them are called silent infections. So you don't realize that you've got them. And that can be really problematic because some of them cause infertility. You've probably heard about chlamydia. Chlamydia is often a silent infection, and it causes the fallopian tubes to block in women and can make them infertile. So it's really important. You don't need to have symptoms, but you need to get checked quite regularly. And then I'm going to talk about the end about what if you do get pregnant, what can you do? Now, I have been doing a survey in schools asking sixth formers various questions about their sex and fertility education. And one of the questions was to ask them how they thought we could improve sex education. And by far the number one comment that was made, the highest comment that was made, was that this education in schools was very heteronormative. So it was assuming that you were going to have sex between a boy and a girl. And so for contraception, I want to make sure that we don't do this. So we need to think about the LGBTQIAA. And if I was in the class with you, I'd ask you what the I and the AA are. So I'll just tell you, they're intersex, asexual, and aromantic. So if you're asexual and aromantic, it's probably that you're not having any sexual relations at this time. Excuse me. And if you're in a same-sex relationship, then you would not need to worry about contraception because I'm going to explain to you now, to get pregnant, you obviously need an egg, a sperm and a womb. So with same-sex relationships, you've got one of those missing. But I am going to talk about considerations for people who don't identify as their assigned sex at birth. But also it's important to think about some of these contraceptions are used for other reasons. So for example, hormonal contraception may be used if a female is having a very heavy period or very painful period. They may be used to lessen the period. Some contraceptions are also used to treat acne. So there are other reasons that contraception might be used apart from contraception. So the methods are used not just for contraception. So let's try and be as inclusive as we can. So to make a baby, as I said, we need an egg, we need sperm, and we need a womb. And we have a big gender inequality with reproduction. We have the issue around the number of eggs and sperm that males and females produce, but also with fertility decline, which I'll come on to in a moment. So women only ovulate one egg per month, and it's that ovulated egg that could be fertilized by the sperm and make a baby. So it's only one egg per month. We have about 500 menstrual cycles in our life. And so we'll ovulate about 500 eggs. So our big gender inequality is that males produce about 100 million sperm per ejaculate. So we only need one, but for some reason they've got about 100 million. So that's every time they ejaculate. So if they ejaculated every day for 7 days, it'd be about 700 million sperm that they would produce. So we do have a bit of an inequality here with numbers. So as well as an egg and a sperm, we do need a womb as well for the baby to grow in. So if you do not align or identify with your sex assigned at birth, we do a lot of work around fertility education for the LGBT community and for the non-binary and trans community to make a baby, again, for any of the LGBT community, to make a baby if they want to have children. We can certainly help with that. We need an egg, a sperm and a womb. So if they're a single or same-sex male couple, they would need to have an egg and a womb. If they're same-sex female couple or single female who wants to have a child, they have eggs and a womb, but they would need some sperm. And regarding non-binary or trans people, it would depend what their partner has, and it would depend how far they've gone down the route, whether they've had any medical transitioning, which I'll come on to in a second. So this applies to contraception as well. They may need to use contraception if they are having penis vaginal sex. So it all depends on who their partner is and what sort of sex they're having. But if they are having penis vaginal sex, then they need to think about some things. And this is quite complicated, so it'd be best to really take this forward with an expert in contraception and in reproductive health. So let's just talk about transitioning at the moment. So some people will just want to identify as a particular gender, but some people will want to undergo medical transition. And medical transitioning, it can be put into two categories. It could just be having hormone treatment. So a trans man could take testosterone and a trans woman would take female hormones. For trans men that are taking testosterone, their periods would normally stop within about 6 months, but there have been reports of pregnancies, and it's a little bit tricky to find out whether these were intentional pregnancies or accidental pregnancies, but they really would need to see a health professional that deals with this to be sure for their particular situation. So there are some trans men who want to become pregnant and who want to carry the baby. And if they do, that seems to be possible. There are trans men certainly who have got pregnant and carried the baby. Trans men, if they're transitioning as well, they can freeze their eggs, and trans women can freeze their sperm. So there's so many different options, but some trans men would really not want to carry the baby, and if they didn't want to carry the baby, then they can use a surrogate. So there's so many different options available depending on their individual situation. But the second part of medical transitioning is to have surgical interventions. Surgical interventions on a trans man may normally involve removing the uterus or the womb. So if they remove their womb, then they will stop having periods and they will not be able to get pregnant. So even if they are then having penis vaginal sex, they will not be able to get pregnant. The womb has gone, so there's nowhere for the embryo to grow. And on a trans woman, if they have a surgical intervention, it may be that their testicles are removed. And if the testicles are removed, they won't produce any sperm. And again, they would not be able to get anyone pregnant. So those would be permanent methods of contraception, in effect, if that was what they needed. So there may be other reasons to use contraception. So certainly condoms for STIs are really important if you're having sex. But obviously with the LGBT community, it really depends on their partner, etc. So there's lots of things to consider, and apologies for not being able to go into that in a little bit more detail. But my advice would be to discuss this with your health professional. So I wanted to share some information which is a little bit depressing, and we are trying to find a sensitive way of explaining this. But the majority of men, not every single man, but the vast majority of men will be fertile from puberty to death. And if I'm in the classroom, I ask for examples of older famous men who have had children. The most common responses were Boris Johnson, and someone said Charlie Chaplin. And so, yeah, there's all sorts of people that you can think about. Donald Trump, that was the other one. I'd forgotten who it was then. Donald Trump came up as well. So men do have a reduction in their fertility around the age of 45. It might take them longer to get their partner pregnant, but most men will be able to still father children way past into their later years. With women, this isn't the case. We are fertile from puberty, as men are, but our fertility has a limited lifespan. And this is because the quantity and quality of our eggs decreases as we age. So females are born with all the eggs we're going to have. We have about 1 to 2 million potential eggs at birth. And unfortunately, by the time we get to puberty, most of those have died. We have about 400,000 eggs left at puberty. And from puberty, I said that we ovulate 1 egg per month, but you could do the maths there. We've got 400,000 at puberty. By the time we get to the menopause, they've all gone. We've got about 500 menstrual cycles, very roughly. So that means each month we lose about 700 to 1,000 eggs. So these eggs just die. One of them will ovulate normally, but the rest die. So this is obviously a difficult situation for women because we are losing our fertility as the eggs go, and we actually lose our fertility about 10 years before we get through the menopause. So we don't have a test at the moment to know when you're going to go through the menopause. And just also to say, I know people haven't learned about the menopause in school, but the menopause is when your menstrual cycles will stop. You will no longer be able to have children. You'll have no more menstrual cycles. You'll have no more periods. And you don't need to worry about contraception, which is great. So the menopause normally happens around age 51, but women lose, as I said, their fertility about 10 years before that, and they also get menopausal symptoms, which I don't have time to go into now, but they're very similar to puberty symptoms. But certainly you lose your fertility about 10 years before you go through the menopause. So as a very rough guide, we do know that there is some association between the age your mother went through the menopause and the age you will go through the menopause for women. So if your mum has been through the menopause, find out what age she was, and that will give you some indication. But if we look at this graph here on the right, this is from my book. There's age along the bottom. So this graph starts at age 20 and shows that fertility goes down as a woman ages, and it becomes really important around age 35. So by the time they get to 40 or 45, most women are going to have infertility and not be able to get pregnant, or find it quite hard to get pregnant. This graph doesn't even go up to your age. It doesn't go up, it doesn't even start at 17 or 18. But the really important take-home message, really key take-home message, is that women are their most fertile when they are younger. So in year 13, you are super fertile. So you have to really consider this all the time. The rate of miscarriage also goes up as you get older, and this is mainly related to the quality of the eggs. If you remember from your biology, we've all got chromosomes, and the eggs and the sperm have one set from mum and one set from dad, and they're going to merge together to make an embryo. And the eggs have very fragile chromosomes. They're actually in the middle of that process, if you remember, meiosis, and they are fragile, and it causes an increased risk of miscarriage, an increased risk of having a chromosomally abnormal child, such as Down syndrome, and a decreased chance of conception, of actually getting pregnant. So as a woman ages, her fertility goes down. So I have been doing a lot of work on Femtech, and Femtech is the use of technology to help women's health, digital technology for women's health. And there are 2 types of menstrual cycle apps that are used quite a lot. There's the period tracker and also fertility apps. So your teachers are now going to ask you another question. If you have periods, how many of you are using a period tracker app? So I'll let them press pause again while they move over and ask you that question. So just to give you a bit of feedback from that, when I've asked this in actually year 11, I gave a lecture on fertility recently to the whole of year 11, and the vast majority of them were using period tracker apps. But when I did this to year 13 for 4 classes, there weren't quite so many. It was slightly more did use it than didn't. But this is a survey that we did. We asked women that were using or had ever used a period tracker app what age they started, and it was very much teenage years that people started using a period tracker. So a few years ago, I contacted a company called Natural Cycles, and they make an app that's not a period tracker. It does track the periods, but it's marketed as a contraception app. And I was very interested in the two key events of our menstrual cycle, which are our period and our ovulation. Now, I know at school you're taught the textbook 28-day cycle, that's a cycle is 28 days, and that you ovulate on day 14. And anything between days 21 and 35 days are considered normal. So Menstrual Cycle use their app for contraception. And this is really not recommended to use an app like this when you're 18 or below, because you're so super fertile. The couple that developed this app were around about 30, and they wanted to have children soon. They wanted to have a method that didn't involve hormones, etc., to use as contraception, but they wouldn't have been that worried if they got pregnant, because they were going to have kids soon. But I was really aware that they had data on millions of menstrual cycles, and this textbook 28 days and 14 days of ovulation is really, really historic data. It came from a number of very, very small studies with just a few hundred women. They were normal BMI. There was very little variation between these women. So I knew that it wasn't quite like that. It wasn't quite that simple. So Natural Cycles uses something that we call a marker of ovulation. So by just looking at our dates, it's really important that I'm going to stress to you now that just looking at your dates, your app can help you estimate when your period's coming, but most of your apps will also tell you when you're ovulating. And this information is highly inaccurate. So I want you please to do not act on that information about ovulation. So Natural Cycle uses a temperature check every morning. It's called basal body temperature. They ask the women using their app to take their temperature every morning and then put it into the app, and the app will tell them the day they ovulate. Your temperature goes up slightly when you're about to ovulate. So this is a mark of ovulation. They weren't just looking at dates. So we could be pretty sure when the women were actually ovulating, because they'd used the app quite a long time and the app had learned about their menstrual cycle. So we found in this study that only 13% of women had a 28-day cycle. So the majority of women, 65%, had cycles that varied between 25 and 30 days. So the first message from this study is do not worry thinking, oh, I've got to be a 28-day cycle. There is variation. But I do think if you're having a very short cycle, so under 21 days, or you're having a very long cycle over 35 days, you might want to go and see a doctor and just get that checked out, because that is outside the normal range for your cycle length. But our really astounding finding was that we found that on average across all the women, the ovulation day was closer to day 17, not day 14. So your period tracker app that just looks at dates is going to tell you, we've done other studies I haven't got time to tell you about, but they are going to tell you that you're ovulating around about day 14, when we can't predict that at all from dates. Chances are you're ovulating nearer to day 17, but again, that's only an estimate. You really can't tell that, and it will vary each month. You know, 1 month you might have a 26-day cycle, next month you might have a 30-day cycle. Depending on that cycle length, you will ovulate on different days. Some of you might have a 21-day cycle. We had people ovulating on day 10 in our study, and we had people ovulating past day 20 in our study. So take-home messages, you can't just look at dates and understand when you're ovulating. So what I really want to stress is that none of you should look at your app and your app says, oh, you're ovulating today, and think, oh, I've ovulated, I can have unprotected sex now, I can't get pregnant. I absolutely assure you that around the world, there have been women who have done this and got pregnant, because the app is not marketed as a contraception app. It's not marketed as a fertility app. It's just looking at your period dates. So please ignore the day of ovulation on your app. So we asked women, does the app accurately predict the start date of your period? Most of them said it got it right most of the time. But there were some people that said it never got it right, or rarely got it right, or only got it right about half the time. So what I want you to know is that it doesn't matter if your period starts earlier or later than the app says. It's fine. It's just one of those things, and we're all individual. Things like feeling ill or being stressed or anxious can delay or make it sooner, make your period happen sooner. So don't worry about it, and don't worry if the app doesn't get it right. It's just an estimate of your period date. And then we asked women the best thing about using the app. Most of them said that they want to know when their period's arriving or help them understand their body. But about 30% said they want to know when they are ovulating. So remember, I've said you've got to ignore that information. And some people had said in our survey that they do have unprotected sex once their app's told them they're ovulating. And what's worrying is the app saying that you're ovulating earlier than you probably are. So day 14 compared to day 17, which is even more dangerous, because any sperm that's around in the womb might be hanging around when you ovulate, and you could get pregnant. And remember, you're super fertile at this age. So the fertile window is the time in a month the woman can get pregnant, and it's actually 6 days. It's the day of ovulation, because the egg lasts for about 24 hours once it's ovulated. But it's also 5 days before. So again, if I was in the classroom, I'd ask you, why do you think it's 5 days before ovulation? And some of the students did get it right, and they said it's because sperm lasts for up to 5 days in the female reproductive tract. So it can stay in the womb or in the fallopian tubes, and it can sit around waiting for a potential egg. So if you think you've ovulated on day 14, you have unprotected sex on day 16, and then you ovulate actually on day 17, you've got really high chance of getting pregnant. So dates, please, dates and ovulation, fertile window, no, 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 no. So as I've mentioned already, there are these markers of ovulation. One of them is temperature. And I'm going to show you some data about how successful this is as a method of contraception. I think for someone of your age where you're super fertile, I think using any of these markers of ovulation as a contraception method is really, really risky. And I really, really wouldn't advise it. They're fine for people who are older, who are less fertile at that age, and who don't really mind if they get pregnant. So basal body temperature, as I said, goes up when you ovulate, goes up here just when you're ovulating. You can check your cervical mucus, which is a bit difficult. And there's also these ovulation sticks, which measure the hormone luteinizing hormone. You may remember this hormone is one of the hormones of your menstrual cycle, and it rises about 24 to 40 hours before you ovulate. So once that test tells you that you're going to ovulate soon, you know that ovulation is going to be imminent. So the next question that your teacher is going to ask you: can you get pregnant if you have sex during your period? So they can pause me again while they ask you this question. So I'm really pleased that the majority of students got this right when I asked them. They said, yes, you can. So the example I would give is, imagine you have your period till day 7, and you have unprotected sex, and that month you actually ovulated on day 12. That is still within the fertile window. There still could be sperm hanging around, and you could get pregnant. So just a quick mention of fertility apps. When you do want to have a child, you do want to more accurately know when you are ovulating. And so if you do want to check this, you can use an app that is actually aimed at fertility, where they're asking you to measure one of the markers of ovulation, not just dates, as I said, that's inaccurate, but measuring a marker of ovulation, such as the basal body temperature or the mucus or the luteinizing hormone, to see when you're ovulating, with the view that you have sex at that time if you're trying to get pregnant. So the take-home messages from the menstrual cycle is that women are all individual and have different menstrual cycles. We cannot predict the day of ovulation by only looking at the menstrual cycle date. So contraception for you, super fertile, is very important. But if you want to get pregnant, then you would look at the fertile window. And if you've got any concerns about your menstrual cycle, then please see your doctor. So let's look at contraception. So some colleagues of mine at UCL have made this really fantastic website. It's called contraceptionchoices.org. It's got lots of information there for you. When you go to a doctor or a sexual health clinic to ask about contraception, chances are you're going to have a 15-minute appointment. And there are so many different methods. And you've got to find what's right for you. And this is an interactive website. You can put in what's important to you. Maybe you don't want periods. Maybe you want to reduce the risk of STIs. Maybe the most important thing for you is not to get pregnant. So this moves the options around as you put in what's important for you. So it's important for guys to look at this too. Now, I just want to concentrate on the men in the room. Historically, people have always assumed that contraception is a woman's problem and that we need to sort it out. We're the ones that get pregnant. We're the ones that carry the baby. I'm pleased that there's been a lot more discussion recently on TV programs and dramas and in the news that it is the men who have to take responsibility as well. Basically, you both have to take responsibility for any pregnancy that happens. So guys, if the girl says, oh yeah, don't worry, I've got it covered, and then she hasn't got it covered and she gets pregnant, the buck ends with you. It's your fault. So my view is, guys, to always use a condom to be sure that you don't risk getting anyone pregnant. If you've got a long-term girlfriend and you know she's using an effective method of contraception, maybe you together decide that you don't need to worry about that, but you've really, really got to take responsibility. So sex is normally an act that maybe takes 10 minutes or half an hour if you're lucky. But the consequences for that short little act could be lifetime being a dad, and being a dad young, being a dad when you don't want to, with someone who you're not the right person to have a kid with. So the buck has to sit with you as well. You have to take responsibility for contraception and do not rely on anybody else, or they say, yeah, it's not important, or, oh, I'm not at risk at the moment, or I'm not ovulating at the moment. So I hope that the guys were listening to everything I just said about the menstrual cycle and about ovulation. Girls really cannot predict when they're ovulating unless they're doing some really high-tech stuff. And even then, you're just too fertile. So please take precautions, because it will be your responsibility as well. It's both of your responsibilities if you get pregnant. So I'm going to ask you, teachers, to ask you this. If you have had sex, do you use contraception every time? So they can put me on pause again. Okay, so unfortunately, when I asked this in the class, a large number of people said that they did not use contraception every time, which was really, really worrying. I'm standing in front of a group of super fertile people, and they're saying they don't use contraception every time. So it's just too risky. I hope that message is getting across. So if you do not want to become pregnant, how do you prevent it? So really, you need to understand each method and think about advantages and disadvantages and how effective it is. And at your age, you really need to use a method that's highly effective. And so I'm going to just run through the information on the Contraception Choices website, but I really want you to visit that website and have a look and play around with it and learn from it and think about what's right for you before you go and see a health professional. I know you can order some things online. I really wouldn't advise it. I think you need to go and see a health professional and discuss it with them. And there's different options, different times of your lives. There's some options that are much more commonly used as you get older. And as I said, discuss it with a health professional. And I've already mentioned the importance of considering STIs, and that you may be using contraception for other reasons besides being a contraceptive. So this is how the data is present. Some of the data, there's a lot more data on contraception choices, but they've got these great diagrams that will say to you, from 100 women in 1 year, how many typically would get pregnant? And I'm just showing you some that I think are really startling. So condoms, male and female, they are contraception and they protect against STIs. So the male condom, 98% effective, but on the Contraception Choices website, it gives 2 percentages. So first is if it is used perfectly, and the second is average use. And the average use is really much lower than perfect use. So again, if I was in the classroom, I would ask you, what do you think could go wrong with using a condom? So if the teacher feels there's time, they might want to stop the video now and ask the class what could go wrong with using a condom. So the answers to that, if you did get it right, are that it could not be put on properly, it could rip or get a hole in it, or it could, although there's another reason. I just had a total mind blank there. Yeah, the other problem that people do is they put the condom on partway through having sex. So they start off having sex without the condom on, and then they put it on. You can have sperm leak from the penis before ejaculation. So putting the condom on partway through, you could still get pregnant. So there are many reasons that those things can happen. So you need to put the condom on before the penis goes in the vagina. You need to keep it on the whole time. You need to take it off really carefully away from the vagina, and you can just hold it in your hand and just check that it's not got a hole or a tear or anything with it. Check all the sperm is encased within the condom. So yeah, it is certainly useful, and the better you use it, the more effective it will be. So hormonal methods of contraception, there are 2 methods. There are some that release progesterone and estrogen, which are the main hormones in the menstrual cycle. And there are some that just give you progesterone. And these are quite high doses, and they have various effects on ovulation and on the womb. So the embryo can't implant in the womb. So if you look, the first number, 99%, really, really effective at stopping a pregnancy. But then you see that they go down to the low 90s for average use. And again, if I was there, I'd ask you what you think could go wrong with taking the pill. So again, I'll leave a gap for the teachers, if they want, can press pause again, and then ask you what you think could go wrong with taking the pill. And what could go wrong with taking the pill is that the girl might forget to take it. She may vomit or be sick and it doesn't get absorbed. And also important to know, there's some antibiotics that stop the absorption of the pill. So if you're in any doubt about anything, then it's really an important idea to discuss this with your doctor. So these are hormonal methods that just give progesterone. The progesterone mini pill is not really advisable for someone your age, because it has to be taken at exactly the same time every day. So these figures about efficiency are sort of across the board, and these figures, the pictures here are across the board. But if we looked at some of these in teenagers, the figures might be worse. Certainly, I think for condoms, it would be worse than it showed you on the previous graph figure. The implant and injection are hugely successful. This is the figure for the implant, and you see less than 1 woman in 100 got pregnant. It's just our little legs here that have been coloured pink. The only reason they're not 100% is sometimes women forget to get them topped up in time. So when the implant or injections run out, rather than get it topped up, they might have left a bit of time because they've forgotten to get it topped up, and then they would ovulate and get pregnant during that time. So if you are really sure about your dates, and make sure you go and get it topped up at the right time, it's really probably 100%, but we never like saying 100%. And then there's also the coil, the Mirena coil, which is hugely effective. It's a coil that goes into your womb. Some young girls don't like having this. It's a bit invasive having it put in. And if you have an STI around your entrance to your womb, or your entrance or in your vagina, when they put this in, they could push this up into your womb, and it can lead to infertility. So it's important to have an STI check before you have this put in, just to be sure that you haven't got anything that could make you infertile. But it's certainly an option for people, more often used when people have already had children. And then we've got non-hormonal methods. As a copper coil, looks similar to the Mirena coil, but it's not releasing any hormones. And the diaphragm and cap with spermicide, really, I wouldn't use that in anyone your age. It's not effective enough. And then permanent methods of contraception. So if we think about people who are having medical transitioning, they, as I said earlier, they could have their womb removed, or they could have their testicles removed, and then that would make them infertile. And sterilization is a bit similar to that. We block the fallopian tube so the egg can't get to meet the sperm, or we block the tubes that lead from the testes to the penis so that the sperm can't get to out of the penis in the ejaculation. And then natural family planning. This is where people just rely on their day of ovulation, knowing their day of ovulation, and they have unprotected sex the rest of the time. As I said, you really need to understand your fertile window and be measuring a marker of ovulation, and you need training to do this. You can use the app, but for someone your age where you're super fertile, I really would not recommend it. So this data is 25 women out of 100 would get pregnant within 1 year, and that's also taking into account older people. So I don't know the data for this if it was done in teenagers. I don't think anyone would ever do that study, because it would just be too risky. The chance of getting pregnant at a younger age would be even higher than that. So I really stress that you shouldn't have unprotected sex at any time of your cycle just because you think you've ovulated. And then the withdrawal method, again, this would be even higher if we looked at younger people, but on average 27 women in 100. As I said, sperm leaks from the penis before withdrawing, and also with withdrawing, some men don't withdraw in time. So just to finish off, we've got a few minutes left. Emergency contraception, there are two methods. There's the IUD, that copper coil can be used, or the oral emergency contraception, or the morning after pill. Now these need to be done as soon as possible. You can buy them online. There's Superdrug or Boots. There's more information on the NHS website. Depending where you live. So this is a talk for a school in Saffron Walden, and there is a Saffron Walden open door clinic, sexual health information and support in Fairycroft House, and I've put the phone number there. And I've been told that on Wednesdays there's a specific clinic for teenagers, but for the morning after pill, I have to stress, you have to have this as soon as possible. It's not a regular form of contraception, it's just a one-off, very much a one-off. So you really have to be prepared. One of the girls suggested, well, could I keep some, if it lasts for a couple of years, could I just keep some just in case and take it if I need it? So I think if you're thinking of doing that, that may be an option, but certainly don't take it every month. It's really very strong and can make you feel really sick. But I would get advice from a sexual health clinic about that before you did that. So to finish off, discussing contraception with your partner, we have to think about consent. I know you really don't like the cup of tea analogy about consent, but consent with sex and contraception is really important. I hope I've instilled on you guys in the room that you have to take responsibility for your contraception and really be aware of this. It's going to be you that becomes the dad. If you're on alcohol and drugs, you cannot consent properly at all. We all know that you get drunk, you can't remember what you did, you can't remember what you said, and you certainly can't remember consenting. So you wake up in the morning and then you think, actually, I didn't agree to that. And it's led to lots of problems and can really ruin people's lives. So, you know, I really would say try not to have sex if you're really drunk, that's a very hard question to do. But yeah, just try and not get so drunk you can't remember what you're doing. But you do have the heat at the moment. And as I said many times, do not rely on the other person. So there's a great website here called Getting It On. They have a lot of information for young people about drinking and having sex whilst you're drunk, taking risks and regretting things later. And there's something called stealthing. I don't know if you know about it. There was a drama a couple of years ago. I think it was called To Die For. I can't remember what it was called. I think it's To Die For, where they were having sex and the guy took off the condom during sex without asking the girl. And that is now, it's now classed as rape. So you must not do that. You must consent to contraception. You need to think about it and you mustn't change things halfway. And if I was in the class, I'd ask you about Drake. I don't know if you know, Google the story. It's about him wanting to make sure that women didn't use his used condom to impregnate themselves. So when you're a famous person, there are women who want to get pregnant with your child. And it's to do with chili sauce. So you can have a read of that in your own time. But I'm not sure whether it's a true story, but it certainly highlights the way that men need to take control of their fertility and their chance of getting someone pregnant. And they are developing a male contraceptive pill. And I think, guys, you know, I think we've always underestimated men and just assumed this is a woman's problem and that men couldn't be trusted to take a pill. But I think for you, I think having an alternative that you could control to make sure that you don't get anyone pregnant, I think it really is needed. I think we've really underestimated men's views on this. So if you did get pregnant, where to get help and advice? Well, if you get pregnant, there are only 3 options. And I think this is a real eye-opener when this is put to you like this. You can either become a parent, you can abort, which I'm sure you've done lots of discussions about the complications of abortion and what you need to consider, or you could put the baby up for adoption. And there's no other options. So if you do get pregnant, you need to speak to as many people as you can and don't leave it too long. Don't leave it weeks. It's not going to go away and it just gets worse. So speak to family, friends, your doctor, health clinic, and NHS 111. So there's the take-home messages. Check out the Contraception Choices website. See how effective each method is. Remember, fertility is highest at your age. Please think about STIs. And for trans and non-binary, you have to consider STIs and may need to consider contraception depending who you're having sex with. And if you've any issues, then please speak to a health professional. It's really important to get professional advice. So if anyone's got any questions, they can feel free to contact me. And if you've got 1 or 2 minutes left, please ask your teacher any questions. And if they don't know the answers, they can certainly pass them on to me. So I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much.